At our family dinner, my son kept shutting me down every single time I tried to talk about my company, the company I built from scratch with my own two hands. Every time I opened my mouth, he'd cut me off with that condescending smile and say, "Dad, I think it's time for you to step back. Let me handle this now." He thought he was so clever. He thought I had no idea what was really going on. But then, right in the middle of dessert, the doorbell rang. My lawyer walked through that door, holding a black envelope, and when my son saw it, his face went completely white, because what was inside that envelope was about to change everything. But to understand how we got to this moment, how a father ends up facing his own son across a dinner table like enemies, I need to take you back to where this all started. But before we get into this story, if you enjoy tales of family betrayal, divine justice and revenge, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You don't want to miss what happens next. Now let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Richard Morrison, and I'm 68 years old. I know what you're thinking when you hear that number. You're picturing someone slow, confused, maybe a little lost in a world that's moved on without him. And honestly, that's exactly what my son started seeing when he looked at me. But let me tell you something about getting older that nobody warns you about. It's not that you lose your sharpness. It's that people stop asking for it. They stop consulting you. They stop listening. And eventually, they start talking over you like you're not even in the room. That's what happened between me and my son, David. It didn't happen overnight. It was slow, like watching a foundation crack one hairline at a time until the whole structure starts to shift. When David was younger, we were close. Really close. He'd come to me with everything. Career advice, relationship problems, business decisions. I was his go-to guy, the one he trusted to help him figure things out. I remember the pride in his voice when he'd introduce me to his colleagues. "This is my dad. He built Morrison Industrial from nothing. He taught me everything I know." Those words used to mean something. But somewhere along the way, things changed. David got successful, climbed the corporate ladder at my company, got the corner office, started making real money. And with that success came something else. Confidence. Too much of it, maybe. He started looking at me differently, like I was a relic from a simpler time. Someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of modern business. The questions stopped coming, the conversations got shorter, and when I'd try to offer advice, I'd see it in his eyes. That polite patience you give to someone who means well but doesn't really get it. It hurt more than I ever let on. I've worked my whole life, 43 years building Morrison Industrial Solutions from a one-man operation in my garage to a $50 million manufacturing company with over 200 employees. I wasn't some guy who got lucky or inherited wealth. I planned. I strategized. I made decisions that kept people employed through recessions, through industry changes, through everything the market threw at us. But to David, all of that became invisible. He saw the gray hair, the reading glasses, the fact that I didn't use all the latest business apps and software, and he made assumptions. He decided I was outdated, that my experience was irrelevant, that the world had passed me by and I just hadn't noticed yet. There's a phrase I heard once that stuck with me. Some parents don't get weaker, they just stop being consulted. That's exactly what happened. I didn't lose my ability to think, to understand, to lead. I just lost my son's respect. And the worst part? I let it happen. I stayed quiet because I thought if I just gave him space, if I didn't push back, eventually he'd remember who I was. Eventually, respect would return on its own. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. Because silence, when it's mistaken for weakness, doesn't bring people back, it pushes them further away. My wife, Catherine, passed away 6 years ago from cancer, and honestly, that loss nearly destroyed me. We built Morrison Industrial together, side by side, and when she died, I threw myself even deeper into the work because it was the only thing that kept me going. David knew how much I was hurting. He saw me at my lowest, and I think that's when things really started to shift in his mind. He stopped seeing me as his strong, capable father and started seeing me as someone fragile, someone who needed protection, someone who needed to be managed. It started small, little things that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. You know how it is when you trust someone so completely that you ignore the red flags right in front of your face. That was me. David would schedule meetings at the company without telling me. Important meetings with department heads, with clients, with our financial advisors. When I'd find out about them afterward and ask why I wasn't included, he'd give me that smile, that patient, condescending smile. Dad, don't worry about it, just routine operational stuff. You've got bigger things to focus on. Bigger things. Like what? I'd built this company. I knew every department, every client relationship, every operational detail better than anyone. But David made it sound like I was above those details now, like I'd earned the right to not be bothered with the day-to-day realities of running the business. At first I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was being too hands-on. Maybe it was time to delegate more and trust the next generation to handle things. So I stepped back. I let him take those meetings. I let him make those decisions without my input. That's when the financial reports started changing. For 35 years, I'd reviewed every quarterly report personally, line by line, because that's how you stay on top of a business. Numbers don't lie, and if you know how to read them, they tell you everything you need to know about the health of your company. But suddenly, David started presenting these simplified summaries instead, PowerPoint presentations with graphs and charts that looked impressive, but didn't show the actual details I needed to see. When I'd ask for the full reports, he'd sigh like I was being difficult. Dad, these summaries have all the important information. I spent hours putting them together to make it easier for you. You don't need to stress over every line item anymore. Easier for me. That's how he framed it. Like he was doing me this huge favor by keeping me in the dark about my own company's finances. And like a fool, I accepted it. I told myself he was just being efficient, that he was trying to save me time, that maybe I really didn't need to see every detail anymore. But deep down, something felt wrong. I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. The board meetings were even worse. We'd sit around that conference table, the same table where I'd made every major decision for this company over the past 4 decades. And David would run the meetings like I wasn't even there. He'd present strategies, propose changes, discuss major contracts, and when I'd try to contribute, when I'd raise a concern or suggest an alternative approach, he'd cut me off. Not aggressively. That would have been too obvious. He'd do it smoothly, professionally, in a way that made it seem like he was just keeping the meeting on track. That's an interesting point, Dad. But I think we need to focus on the current market realities here. Or, I appreciate your perspective, but the data shows we need to move in a different direction. The data. He loved using that phrase, like I didn't understand data. Like I hadn't been analyzing market trends and financial projections since before he was born. And the worst part, the board members went along with it. These were people I'd known for years, people I'd brought onto the board, people who'd made fortunes because of the decisions I'd made for this company. But they started looking to David for leadership instead of me. They started nodding along with his presentations, agreeing with his proposals, treating him like he was the CEO and I was just some emeritus advisor who showed up out of courtesy. I remember one meeting in particular, about 5 months ago, where David proposed selling off our original manufacturing division. The division that started everything. The division that employed 80 people, many of whom had been with me since the beginning. His reasoning was purely financial. The profit margins were lower than our newer divisions, and he wanted to optimize our portfolio by cutting what he called underperforming assets. I spoke up immediately. I explained that those 80 employees were the backbone of our company culture. that their experience and loyalty were worth more than what showed up on a spreadsheet, that selling that division would destroy morale across the entire company. David listened with that patient expression, like a teacher waiting for a confused student to finish talking. Then he pulled up a slide showing projected earnings with and without that division. The numbers looked compelling if you didn't understand the full context. And he said, in front of the entire board, "Dad, I understand you have an emotional attachment to that division. You started it, and that means something. But we can't run a modern company on nostalgia. We have to make decisions based on data and market realities, not sentiment." Emotional attachment, nostalgia, sentiment. He reduced 35 years of relationship building and company culture to feelings that didn't matter in the face of his precious data. The board voted to move forward with exploring the sale. 6 votes in favor, 1 against. My vote. The only vote that apparently didn't matter anymore. I sat there watching my son dismantle something I'd built, watching people I'd trusted side with him over me, and I felt something crack inside. Not anger, not yet. Just this deep, hollow realization that I'd lost control of my own company without even noticing it happening. And my son, the person I'd groomed to eventually take over, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world, he was the one leading the charge. After that meeting, I went back to my office and just sat there for a long time, staring at the walls covered with photos from over the years, groundbreaking ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, company anniversaries. Pictures of me and Catherine standing in front of our first small facility, pictures of a young David at company picnics, running around with the employees' kids. All these memories of what we'd built together, as a family, as a team. And I wondered how we'd gotten to this point, how the son I'd raised, the boy I'd taught everything I knew, could look at me now and see nothing but an obstacle to be managed. My daughter Emma came to visit about a week after that board meeting. She lives in Oregon with her family, teaches high school English, and we don't get to see each other as often as I'd like. But she'd called me the night after the meeting, said she heard something in my voice that worried her, and booked a flight out to see me. We had dinner at my house, just the 2 of us, and I tried to act like everything was fine, but Emma's always been able to see right through me. She set down her fork halfway through the meal and looked at me with those concerned eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Dad, what's going on with David and the company? And don't tell me everything's fine, because I can see it's not." I wanted to brush it off, to tell her she was worrying about nothing, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself telling her everything. The meetings I wasn't invited to, the simplified financial reports, the board meeting where my vote didn't matter, the way David talked to me like I was some confused old man who didn't understand how business worked anymore. Emma listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that hit me harder than I expected. "Dad, this isn't just about business decisions. This is about respect. David's treating you like you're incompetent, and you're letting him." I started to defend him immediately, started to explain that he was just trying to modernize the company, that maybe I really was being too old-fashioned in my thinking. But Emma cut me off. "Stop. Just stop defending him. You built that company from nothing. You employed hundreds of people. You made decisions that kept that business alive through recessions and market crashes and everything else. And now your own son is pushing you out and making you feel like you don't matter anymore. That's not okay, Dad. That's not okay at all." She grabbed my hand across the table, and her voice got softer, but more intense. "I know my brother. I grew up with him. And I'm telling you, something's not right here. This isn't just about him being ambitious or wanting to take the company in a new direction. This feels like something else. Something calculated." I asked her what she meant, and she hesitated before answering. "I don't know exactly, but I think you need to start paying closer attention. Real attention. Not just to what David's saying, but to what he's actually doing. I should have listened to her right then. I should have taken her warning seriously and started digging into what was really going on. But I didn't. I told her she was being paranoid, that David would never do anything to hurt me or the company, that she just didn't understand the pressures of running a business in today's market. Emma looked at me with this expression of frustration and sadness mixed together. "Dad, you're one of the smartest men I know, but right now you're choosing to be blind, and I'm scared of what's going to happen when you finally see what's really going on." She flew back to Oregon the next day, and we left things tense between us. I hated that. But I still wasn't ready to believe that David could be doing something truly wrong. The next few weeks, things got worse. David started making changes without even the pretense of consulting me. He restructured 3 departments, let go of 2 senior managers who'd been with the company for over 15 years, and brought in outside consultants who knew nothing about our company culture or history. When I confronted him about it, asked him why he was making such major changes without discussing them with me first, he actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, but that patronizing chuckle that made my blood boil. "Dad, these are operational decisions, day-to-day management stuff. You appointed me VP of Operations specifically so you wouldn't have to worry about this level of detail anymore. I'm just doing my job." But these weren't small operational tweaks. These were fundamental changes to how the company functioned. And the people he was letting go, the managers he was replacing, they were all people who'd been loyal to me. People who would have pushed back against decisions they thought were wrong. People who would have told me if something wasn't right. I started to wonder if Emma had been on to something. If maybe this wasn't just about modernizing the company, maybe this was about removing anyone who might question what David was doing. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I started keeping notes. Every meeting David had that I wasn't invited to, I'd write it down. Every financial report that seemed incomplete or unclear, I'd note the discrepancies. Every decision he made without consulting me, I'd document it. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew something was off. I could feel it in my gut, that same instinct that had guided me through 40 years of business decisions. Something was wrong, and I needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. Then came the incident with the company credit cards. I'd gone to use my corporate card to take a potential client to dinner, something I'd done hundreds of times over the years, and the card was declined. Declined. I was standing at the restaurant in front of a client I was trying to impress, and my own company credit card didn't work. I ended up using my personal card and laughing it off as a banking error, but inside I was humiliated. The next morning, I went straight to David's office to find out what had happened. He was sitting behind his desk, looking completely unfazed when I walked in. I asked him about the credit card, and he nodded like he'd been expecting the question. "Oh, right. I meant to mention that to you. We restructured the corporate card program last week, implemented spending limits and approval processes to better track expenses. Your card has a new limit of $500 per transaction. Anything over that needs pre-approval from the finance department." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. A $500 limit on my own company credit card, the company I'd founded, the company I still technically owned the majority of shares in. "David," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, "I'm the founder and CEO of this company. Why would my corporate card have any limit at all, let alone one that requires me to get approval for basic business expenses?" He leaned back in his chair with that expression I'd come to hate, that look that said he was about to explain something obvious to someone who just didn't get it. "Dad, it's not personal. Everyone has limits now. It's about financial controls and accountability. Even I have to get approval for expenses over $10,000. It's just good business practice." But it wasn't the same, and we both knew it. He'd set my limit low enough that I couldn't even take clients to a decent dinner without asking permission. low enough that it sent a message to everyone in the company. Richard Morrison doesn't have real authority anymore. He's just a figurehead, an old man we keep around out of respect for what he used to be. I left his office without another word, because if I'd stayed, I would have said something I couldn't take back. And I still wasn't ready to believe that my own son was deliberately trying to push me out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened over the past several months. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't ignore it anymore. David wasn't just taking initiative or modernizing the company. He was systematically removing my authority, isolating me from decision-making, and positioning himself as the real leader while reducing me to a symbolic role. And he was doing it so smoothly, so professionally, that to anyone on the outside, it probably looked like a natural transition, a son stepping up to help his aging father. A new generation taking the reins while honoring the old guard. But I knew better now. This wasn't honor. This wasn't respect. This was a calculated takeover, and I needed to find out exactly how far it had gone. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 35 years of running Morrison Industrial. I went into the office at 5:30 a.m. before anyone else arrived, and I started digging through files. Not the sanitized summaries David had been giving me, but the actual financial records, the real operational reports, the documents that told the truth about what was happening in my company. I had access to everything, at least technically. My login credentials still worked for all the systems. David probably assumed I didn't know how to navigate the digital filing systems, or that I wouldn't bother to look. He was wrong on both counts. What I found in those first few hours made my stomach turn. There were contracts I'd never seen before, consulting agreements with firms I'd never heard of, paying fees that seemed excessive for the services described, expense reports showing charges that didn't make sense, business trips to locations we had no clients in, dinners and entertainment expenses that were far beyond what any legitimate business meeting would require, and all of it approved by David, signed off on by David, processed through accounts that David controlled. I kept digging, and the picture got worse. There were emails between David and several board members discussing company strategy and major decisions, entire conversations I'd never been included in. They talked about me in those emails, not by name, but the references were clear. The old guard is resistant to change. We need to move forward without being held back by outdated thinking. It's time to transition leadership before emotional attachments damage the company's future. They were planning my removal. Not someday in the distant future, soon. And they were building a case to justify it. But the thing that really got me, the thing that made my hands shake as I read through those files, was a document titled Succession Plan Confidential. It was dated 3 months ago, and it outlined a detailed strategy for transferring complete control of Morrison Industrial from me to David. Not gradually, not through a respectful transition where I'd maintain some advisory role. Complete transfer. The plan included steps to have me declared mentally unfit to continue as CEO, using documented instances of confusion, poor judgment, and resistance to necessary changes as evidence. Documented instances. They'd been building a file on me. Every time I'd questioned a decision, every time I'd pushed back against one of David's proposals, every time I'd asked for more information or expressed concern about the direction things were going, they documented it as evidence of my declining mental capacity. They were going to use my own attempts to stay involved in my company as proof that I was no longer competent to run it. The manipulation was so calculated, so thorough, that I felt sick reading through it. I printed everything, every document, every email, every financial record that showed what was really going on. I made copies and stored them in 3 different locations, because I knew that once David realized I was onto him, he'd try to lock me out of the systems. Then I went home, called my personal attorney, a man named Robert Chen, who'd handled my estate planning and personal legal matters for over 20 years, and I told him I needed to see him immediately, not at his office. Somewhere private where we wouldn't be seen together. We met at a coffee shop an hour outside of town, and I spread the documents out on the table between us. Robert read through them carefully, his expression getting darker with each page. When he finally looked up at me, he said exactly what I'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to admit. "Richard, this isn't just a business dispute. This is fraud. Your son has been systematically embezzling from the company, and he's been setting you up to take the fall or be removed before you could discover it." The consulting fees, Robert explained, were likely going to shell companies that David controlled. The excessive expenses were probably being split between David and the board members who were helping him. And the succession plan wasn't just about taking over the company. It was about making sure I couldn't fight back when the truth came out. If they could have me declared mentally incompetent, anything I said about the fraud would be dismissed as the confused ramblings of a sick old man. It was brilliant in its cruelty, and it was being orchestrated by my own son. Robert asked me what I wanted to do. We could go to the authorities immediately, start a criminal investigation, bring everything out into the open. But I surprised myself with my answer. I told him I wanted to wait. I wanted to gather more evidence, build an airtight case, and most importantly, I wanted to confront David myself. Not in a courtroom, not through lawyers and investigators. I wanted to look my son in the eye and make him face what he'd done. Robert warned me that waiting was risky, that David might discover I knew and try to accelerate his plans. But I was firm. This was personal, and it needed to be handled personally. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the role David expected me to play. The confused old man who didn't quite understand what was happening around him. I went to meetings and stayed quiet. I accepted the simplified reports without asking questions. I let David make decisions without pushing back, but the whole time I was watching, documenting, building my case, and planning exactly how I was going to bring everything crashing down around him. Robert worked behind the scenes, quietly gathering additional evidence, talking to forensic accountants, preparing legal documents that would be needed when the time came. We discovered that David had been planning this for at least 8 months, maybe longer. The fraud totaled over $2.3 million that we could prove, possibly more that was hidden in ways we hadn't uncovered yet. He'd been careful, spreading it out across multiple accounts and transactions, making each individual amount small enough that it wouldn't trigger automatic audits. But when you added it all up, it was devastating. The board members who were helping him, there were 3 of them. They were getting kickbacks through the consulting contracts. Not huge amounts, nothing that would make them wealthy, but enough to buy their loyalty and their silence. Gerald Thompson, the man I'd considered one of my closest friends for over 20 years, he was getting $15,000 a month through a consulting agreement for services he never actually provided. 20 years of friendship, bought off for $15,000 a month. It was almost insulting how cheap his loyalty had been. I also discovered something else during those 2 weeks. David had been talking to competitors. Specifically, he'd been in negotiations with Hartman Industries, our biggest competitor, about a potential merger. Not a merger where Morrison Industrial would maintain its independence and identity. A merger where we'd be absorbed completely. Where the Morrison name would disappear, where our employees would be restructured, which is corporate speak for fired and replaced. And David would walk away with a massive payout, probably $20 million or more, while everything I'd built would cease to exist. That's when I knew this wasn't just about money for him. This was about erasing me, erasing my legacy, taking everything I'd built and turning it into something completely different, something that bore no trace of my influence or my values. He didn't just want control of the company. He wanted to destroy what it represented and rebuild it in his own image. And he was willing to betray me, defraud the company, and ruin hundreds of lives to do it. I decided it was time. Time to stop playing the role of the confused old man. Time to stop gathering evidence and start using it. Time to show my son exactly who he'd been underestimating. Robert and I planned everything carefully. We chose the date, the location, the witnesses who would be present. We prepared the documents, the evidence, the legal actions that would be taken, and we decided that the confrontation would happen at the one place where David felt most confident, most in control, most certain of his victory. The annual company dinner. Every year, Morrison Industrial held a formal dinner to celebrate the company's founding anniversary. It was a tradition Catherine and I had started 30 years ago, a way to bring together employees, board members, major clients and family to celebrate what we'd built together. This year's dinner was scheduled for 3 weeks away, and David had taken over planning it. He'd sent out invitations, booked the venue, arranged everything. And in his invitation to me, he'd included a note that made my blood boil. "Dad, I think this year's dinner would be a perfect opportunity for you to announce your retirement. A graceful exit, celebrating your legacy while passing the torch to the next generation. Let me know if you'd like me to draft some remarks for you." A graceful exit. He wanted me to stand up in front of everyone, smile, and hand him everything I'd built, while he and his conspirators applauded and pretended it was all my idea. He wanted me to participate in my own erasure, to validate his takeover by making it look like a loving transition from father to son. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He actually thought I was so blind, so weak, so completely fooled, that I'd stand up and give him my blessing while he stole everything from me. I wrote back a simple response. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, David. I'll prepare some remarks. This will definitely be a night to remember." He had no idea how true that statement was. Robert and I finalized our plans. The evidence was compiled into a presentation that would leave no room for doubt. The legal documents were prepared and ready to be served. And I invited one additional guest to the dinner, someone David wasn't expecting. A federal investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. Someone Robert had been working with quietly over the past 2 weeks. Everything was in place. The days leading up to the dinner were strange. I'd see David around the office, watch him interact with the board members who were part of his scheme, observe how confident they all were that everything was going according to plan. They had no idea that I knew, no idea that every smile I gave them, every polite nod, every moment of seeming confusion or acceptance, it was all an act. I was playing the role they expected, letting them believe they'd won, while I prepared to pull the rug out from under all of them. Emma called me 2 days before the dinner. She'd heard about David's suggestion that I announce my retirement, and she was furious. "Dad, please tell me you're not actually going to do this. Please tell me you're not going to just hand him everything after what he's been doing to you." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it over the phone. "Emma, I promise you, that dinner is going to be very different from what David's expecting. Trust me. And make sure you're there to see it." There was a long pause, and then she said quietly, "Dad, what are you planning?" I told her she'd find out soon enough and that I loved her. She'd understand everything when the time came. The night before the dinner, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I kept going over every detail, making sure nothing had been overlooked. This wasn't just about exposing David's fraud. This wasn't just about saving my company. This was about something deeper. This was about a father having to destroy his own son's carefully constructed lies because that son had forgotten the most basic principle of family, of business, of life itself. Respect. You don't build anything real by tearing down the people who came before you. You don't create a legacy by erasing someone else's, and you definitely don't betray the person who gave you everything and expect to walk away without consequences. The night of the dinner arrived. The venue was beautiful, exactly the kind of elegant setting David had chosen to make his moment of triumph feel important. The room was filled with people, over 100 guests, employees, board members, clients, all dressed in their finest. David was working the room like he owned it, shaking hands, laughing, playing the role of the confident leader who was about to officially take over his father's legacy. He saw me arrive and walked over with that big smile, the one he used when he wanted to appear caring. "Dad, you look great. Are you ready for tonight? I think everyone's really excited to hear what you have to say." I smiled back at him. "Oh, I'm ready, David. This is definitely going to be a night nobody forgets." He patted my shoulder, completely missing the edge in my voice, and walked away to greet more guests. Emma arrived a few minutes later, and when she saw me, I could see the question in her eyes. I gave her a small nod, and she understood. Whatever was about to happen, I had it under control. Robert was already there, sitting at a table near the back with his briefcase beside him, and at a table near the entrance, looking like just another guest, was the federal investigator, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who'd been briefed on everything. Dinner was served, and the room filled with the sound of conversation and laughter. David kept glancing at me, clearly anxious for the moment when I'd stand up and make my announcement. He'd even prepared a video tribute to my career, a montage of photos and accomplishments that was supposed to play right before I handed everything over to him. It was all so perfectly orchestrated, so perfectly arrogant. When dessert was being served, David stood up and tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. The room went quiet. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice confident and warm. "This company means everything to our family, and tonight is a very special night. My father built Morrison Industrial from nothing, and for 35 years, he's led this company with integrity and vision. But as we all know, every great leader eventually has to think about the future, about succession, about ensuring that what they built continues to thrive for generations to come." He looked directly at me, and I could see the expectation in his eyes. This was my cue. This was when I was supposed to stand up and play my part in his carefully scripted takeover. I stood up slowly, and the room's attention shifted to me. David smiled, thinking everything was going according to plan. I walked to the front of the room, and instead of standing at the podium where David expected me to deliver my retirement speech, I stopped and turned to face him directly. "David, before I say anything else, I need to ask you something. Do you remember what I taught you when you first started working at this company?" He looked confused, but played along. "You taught me a lot of things, Dad." I nodded. I did. But there was one lesson I thought was the most important. "Do you remember what it was?" The room was completely silent now. David's smile was starting to fade. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." I took a step closer to him. "I told you that integrity is the foundation of everything, that you can have all the talent and ambition in the world, but if you don't have integrity, you don't have anything real. You don't have anything that lasts. Do you remember me saying that?" David's face had gone pale. He knew. Somehow, in that moment, he knew that I knew. "Dad, maybe we should discuss this privately." I shook my head. "No, David. We're going to discuss this right here, right now, in front of everyone, because these people deserve to know the truth." I turned to address the room. "For the past 8 months, my son has been systematically stealing from this company. He's embezzled over $2.3 million through fake consulting contracts and fraudulent expenses. He's been working with 3 members of our board to cover it up and to build a case to have me declared mentally incompetent, so I couldn't stop him. And he's been negotiating with our biggest competitor to sell this company out from under all of you, which would result in most of you losing your jobs." The room erupted. Gasps, shocked conversations, people turning to look at David, whose face had gone from pale to red. "That's not true," David said, his voice shaking. "Dad, you're confused. You don't understand what you're saying. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the presentation screen. I'm not confused, David. I'm perfectly clear. And I have evidence. The screen lit up with documents, emails, financial records, everything I'd gathered over the past 2 weeks. I walked through it methodically, showing exactly what he'd done, how he'd done it, and who had helped him. Gerald Thompson stood up, trying to leave, but Robert was already at the door with Sarah Mitchell, blocking the exit. David tried to defend himself, tried to explain it away, but with each document I showed, each email I read aloud, his explanations got weaker. The board members who'd been part of it sat frozen, knowing they'd been caught. The employees who'd trusted David looked betrayed. The clients looked horrified. And Emma, my daughter, she had tears streaming down her face, but she was nodding, proud that I'd finally stood up for myself. When I finished presenting the evidence, I turned back to David. You wanted me to announce my retirement tonight, to gracefully step aside and hand you everything I built, but here's what's actually going to happen. I nodded to Robert, who pulled documents from his briefcase. You're fired, effective immediately. You're being removed from the board, and criminal charges are being filed against you for fraud and embezzlement. These 3 board members, I pointed to Gerald and the others, are also being removed and will face charges. The company will be restructured under new leadership that actually understands what integrity means. David's legs seemed to give out, and he sat down hard in his chair. Dad, please, I'm your son. Those words. After everything he'd done, he thought that being my son would save him. You're right, I said quietly. You are my son, and that makes this hurt more than you'll ever understand. I gave you everything, David. I trusted you with my life's work, and you repaid that trust by trying to destroy me and everything I built. So yes, you're my son, but that doesn't mean you get to escape the consequences of what you've done. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward then, showing her credentials. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have some questions about these financial irregularities. David looked at me one last time, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real fear. Not of the legal consequences, but of the realization that he'd destroyed our relationship forever, that he'd betrayed the one person who'd always believed in him, and there was no coming back from that. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you raised? Have you ever watched someone stand on the foundation you built and try to destroy you with it? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you want more stories about family betrayal, divine justice and revenge, hit that subscribe button right now, because there are more stories like this that need to be told. Now let me tell you what happened after that night. David was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He ended up pleading guilty and serving 3 years in prison. Gerald Thompson and the other 2 board members were also charged, and they lost everything. Their reputations, their positions, their freedom. The company survived. I brought in new leadership, people with integrity, who understood that business isn't just about profit, it's about people. We recovered the stolen money, restructured operations, and within a year, Morrison Industrial was stronger than it had been in a decade. Emma and I grew closer. She told me she was proud that I'd finally stood up for myself, that I'd stopped letting people walk over me just to keep the peace. And she was right. I'd spent too long being silent, thinking that respect would come back on its own. But respect doesn't work that way. Sometimes you have to demand it. Sometimes you have to show people exactly who you are and what you're capable of, even when it breaks your heart to do it. As for David, I visited him once in prison. Not to gloat, not to rub his face in what he'd lost, but because he was still my son. He apologized, really apologized, and told me he'd spent every day thinking about what he'd done, about how greed and ambition had made him forget everything I'd taught him. I told him that when he got out, if he wanted to rebuild his life with integrity, I'd help him. Not by giving him money or position, but by teaching him what I should have made sure he understood from the beginning. That you don't build anything real by tearing other people down. That legacy isn't about what you take, it's about what you give. I'm 71 years old now. I still run Morrison Industrial, and I plan to keep running it until I find someone who truly deserves to take over. Someone who understands that power without integrity is just destruction waiting to happen. My son tried to silence me at a family dinner because he thought I was weak, outdated, irrelevant. But what he learned that night was something everyone needs to understand. The people who built the foundation you're standing on, they're not weak just because they're quiet. They're not irrelevant just because they're older. And they definitely don't forget how to fight when someone tries to take what's theirs. That black envelope my lawyer brought to the dinner. It contained the truth. And the truth is the most powerful weapon you'll ever have. So if you enjoyed this story, make sure you're subscribed because there are more coming. Stories about people who stayed quiet until the perfect moment. Stories about divine justice. Stories about revenge, served cold and calculated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.